everybody. Mike and Tim here. It is a holly jolly Christmas time. We hope. Tim, what is your favorite?
Jolly.
What is your favorite Christmas song?
Oh man.
Do you have like or a couple?
Well, I think my favorite is the main track from the Peanuts. Like I can't think of the name of it because you're just
the Christmas
putting me on the
special.
spot. Yeah, you know, like the jazz trio song, the Christmas Time Is Here or whatever. Like
yeah.
Kind of soft jazz. I always love that song.
Yeah.
My favorite probably right now though is the Run DMC song because it was Mazzy, my daughter's. Like we would dance to that all the time.
I love that.
It's a good Christmas song.
I mean, I'm just saying. Everybody puts out a Christmas album.
Nothing says Christmas like Run DMC.
Totally. All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, we've got.
Wait, what's yours?
What's mine?
Yeah.
Oh, bro, I'm a sucker for Little Drummer Boy.
Like which version of it?
Yeah. Well, there was the what's the name of it? The Harry Simone choir. Let me find it real quick. Oh, sorry. Yeah, the Harry Simone Chorale. So this was like 40s, 50s. I just love it. And I remember being a kid. I have no idea why, but I remember being a kid watching that. It was a special, right?
Yeah.
It was one of those like not animated, but sort of like stop motion specials, and weeping. I don't know why, but that song just always gets me. It's always the first song I play when it's time to play Christmas music.
What is it?
Yes.
What is it? Like this morning on the way to school, the kids were playing songs that were from Home Alone, like Carol of the Bells, and
yes.
And then there's one that always makes me think of Die Hard because it was in all the trailers. Like
that's funny.
Was it Ode to Joy?
That's funny.
But they had like a big bombastic version of it that played in all the trailers all the time.
I love that, man.
You know Die Hard, the Christmas movie?
Of course.
Put the debate to rest.
Did you see the Advent calendar where
now I have a machine gun? Ho, ho, ho. Yeah, I did. It was great.
The Advent calendar that's got the guy Hans, free falling down from 1 to 25 or 25 to 1 or whatever it is. Anyway, friends, thank you for tuning in today. We've got a show. And we're going to just do a quick intro because we've got one of my favorite theologians. She is a Pauline scholar who has written commentaries, like in huge commentary series on Ephesians and Philippians. All right, so she is a world-class scholar. And when people talk about like who are some of your favorite female scholars, she is absolutely that. She wrote a book called Women in the World of the Earliest Christians, Illuminating Ancient Ways of Life. And that's where I discovered Dr. Lynn Cohick. And you can buy that book on Amazon. And it's surprising how much women were permitted to do in culture. And then the analog of, well, that carries over into the church. And I've been wanting to have her on the podcast forever. And we thought as a part of the conversation we've been having around men and women and so on, she'd be great because, I mean, she is a world-class theologian. And the battle that she's had to fight to kind of get there, we'll talk about, a little bit. And we'll also revisit 1 Timothy 2 and just in general sort of talk about her approach to these issues and how often we start kind of on the wrong foot with the wrong questions, not where the Bible starts, which is the massive affirmation of women's value, dignity, role. So we're excited for that. I want to just say a couple of quick thank yous to we have some new patrons. Again, this is the time for year-end giving. If you're interested in that, we are a 501c3 nonprofit, and there are two platforms that we use. You can find them both on voxologypodcast.com, tithe.ly, and Patreon. We had 3 people join the Patreon team this last week, and so I just want to do a quick shout out to them. I want to thank Lilia. I think that's how you pronounce it. Paul, I know that's how you pronounce that. And Pushpa, who we've mentioned before, but came on as kind of an annual subscriber. And so I just want to say thank you to the three of you. We talked a little bit on Patreon this past week about where the podcast is going. We're excited to add a YouTube channel and to begin filming our episodes and releasing our faces, particularly Tim's, into the world. We want to do some things for overburdened and really lonely, burned out, hurting ministry leaders. We want to do some things. We want to better organize Patreon. And then we want to begin again to see community happen out of the podcast. We get so many questions from people who are asking, hey, do you know of a good church in this area? Or is there anyone I could connect with? And Tim was kind of spearheading that before the pandemic, and we're excited to get back to that. All that is to say, all of that extra stuff is possible because of your generosity. So thank you very much for all of that. Like I said, today we're going to have an interview with Dr. Cohick, and then we're going to wrap up the Men and Women series next week. There may be a Christmas episode. We're not sure. God bless us, everyone. If there is, if there's not, we'll see. But that's what's coming. So, guys, we just couldn't be more thankful for you, thankful to get to do all of this together with you. And so, Tim.
What?
Since Seth isn't here, hit that music.
Play my theme song.
Oh, ladies and gentlemen, we are here today with a heavyweight, and I don't mean physically.
Thank you.
I mean, well, we already have one of those.
Dig yourself in a hole here, Mike.
Sorry, yeah, no, seriously, that's where we start. No, heavyweight intellectually, one of my favorite theologians, Dr. Lynn Cohick. Lynn, thank you so much for joining us today. I've been super excited to have a conversation with you about this idea of biblical womanhood and the passages that are often used to restrict the roles of women. If I could sort of start way back in the day, what was your inherited culture? Were you raised in a religious home? If you were, what teachings did you receive about the role of women in the church, in the home, in culture, if any? And then I'd love to kind of pick up your journey from there.
Yeah, well, thanks, Mike, and Tim, thanks so much for inviting me on to this podcast. Typically, when someone meets me, heavyweight is not my 5'3" frame doesn't elicit, like a heavyweight boxer image. So,
well, but
thank you for that. I kind of like that. I'm gonna use that.
I had read you, so that's where the heavyweight comes in.
Yeah, I like that. Thanks. I was raised in probably what I would call a nominal Christian family. We were United Methodist. I was baptized as an infant into the church. And we would go sporadically. I think my parents believed the Christian message, but it wasn't an integral part of their lives, I think they would say at this point. But when I was in junior high, and my mom and I especially were going to United Methodist Church, the pastor there and also the youth pastor both were born again. And I really heard the gospel in an exciting way at that point. So both my mom and I came to faith, had an experience that way. And within a short while, that United Methodist Church removed both of those pastors as preaching things they didn't really like. Oh, wow. So at that point, I shifted, and my mom, we shifted to an evangelical free church that had just started about a year earlier. I was raised, I'm the firstborn, and I think I remember my dad telling me and my sister, who was a couple years younger than me, don't be cream puffs, girls, get on out there, and we did downhill skiing as kids. We rode horses as kids, did fox hunting.
Wow.
We were,
Nice.
we were just outside doing. We were free range kids, I think is how they might say it today. That was just how kids were back in the day, which I'm glad for. So when I first came to, as a 16-year-old, as I was talking about my faith, I remember my dad saying, "Oh, well, then you'll be a pastor, right?" Well, at this point, we had been in the E-Free Church for a little while, and I said, "Oh no, Dad, women can't be pastors." So I think I was raised that women could do that, because in the United Methodist, that wasn't an issue at that time. And it certainly wasn't an issue with my parents, but it was an issue with the E-Free Church. This would have been in the late 70s. And so that kind of set me up, as I kind of was hearing there were two different visions that were cast. One was that women could serve and speak the word to others, teaching and preaching, and then another, which was more isolated. Women could maybe do that, could teach other women, but not teach men.
Yeah. And when did that view begin to shift? Was it something that you resisted and instinctively, the view that you were restricted in certain roles, or how did you start engaging that smaller vision, either critically, or did you sort of inherit it and didn't think to question it until later?
No, I think I probably questioned it kind of from the get-go. Not at the very beginning when I was 16. I'm just learning stuff at that point. But by the time I go off to college, and I am really very interested in becoming a New Testament professor. I had that dream probably by the time I was a junior in college, and I always loved to teach. So at first I was an early childhood, elementary education major, and then I worked with children. And for the sake of the children, I changed. Yeah, it was not a good fit. I do not have the skills, not even close. Yeah. So anyway, I thought, well, how about older kids? That might be better all the way around. So yeah. So that was. Yeah, in pursuing that and going on and getting my PhD, I went straight from undergrad to the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia and began working on my PhD in New Testament. And I think because I was learning about the ancient world and about the New Testament world at, pretty high level, and I had always wanted to teach, I think I just began banging up against the restrictions at our church. I wanted to teach in adult education. I didn't really care whether I was an elder or not. That really wasn't a goal of mine. My husband was an elder for a short while, and he was on the worship team. He was very involved along those lines, but I did want to teach. And the church did not have a written policy against women teaching in mixed adult Sunday school classes, but there were a couple of men, there were only men on the education committee, and a couple of them didn't want women to do that, and so they put up a lot of roadblocks, and I'm kind of, I can be
heavyweight.
Persistent.
Let's use it.
Let's
use the word.
There you go. I'm going to use that. Yes. So I didn't give up, and I kept pushing and being an irritant. And that's one of my spiritual gifts.
I love it. And when you were studying New Testament, what was becoming apparent to you that you hadn't heard in the church about this?
Yeah. Well, I would say there was a moment for me, one of the days that I was taking the train from Harrisburg to Philadelphia early in the morning, getting the 6 a.m. train to get my classes, and like a good evangelical, start the day, Bible reading and prayer, which is a mainstay, right? I mean, you just have to have that connection, whatever time of day it is, but that connection, that daily connection with the Lord. And I think I was reading from the earliest NIV when you had the male generic pronoun, he and him.
Yeah.
And so I was reading, I think, from 1 Corinthians, and that masculine pronoun kept coming up. And I remember almost coming to tears and just saying, Lord, am I anywhere here? And
Wow.
yes. And at the same time, I was taking a class on feminism and Christianity. And everyone in the class, there were only women, there were about 20 women or so, all of them, except one and myself, were what they would call themselves post-Christian. This is in the mid-'80s. And so there was a sense that, the church had nothing for women. It was only oppressive for women. There was as I mentioned, there was one other Christian who I think was maybe Episcopal. Otherwise, it was just me. And my heart broke. I thought, I wish you women would know Jesus, because the experience that you had in the church sounds like it was awful, but that's not who Jesus is. So I think I knew that that God addressed me in the Bible, and my heartbreak there in my prayers was this insistent on the generic male pronoun was it was like a barrier. Like that was frustrating. But on the other side, thought, I want to know Jesus more, and I want other women to know Jesus more. I don't want for them to reject Jesus because the church appears to them to have forsaken them. So I think that's what that I would say was kind of the defining moments that set me on my journey to both engage with Scripture more deeply and see what the Lord really has in His Word, and do so for the sake of the church, especially those who leave the church because of misunderstandings or frankly, as we now know, just a lot of sin that has hurt women.
How would you have now, however many years later, how would you address you then in terms of what have you learned a sense that would have been revolutionary to you about whether it's the masculine pronoun or Paul's emphasis on overturning, kind of gendered roles through the household codes or whatever it is? What is it that you would say to yourself back then?
Yeah, well, I would say to myself, and I have said to my students who were undergrads at Wheaton College, where I taught for a long time, I would say, first of all, it gets better. That is to say, you get better. In your 20s, the world's all in front of you, but you don't have a lot of successes behind you, or at least I didn't. And I think most people don't. So you're still trying to find yourself, and you're fragile. I think men are fragile too. I mean, it's just the age that you are, but the fragileness is experienced by women in different ways, especially when they sense like they have a godly passion to pursue at the highest levels biblical studies and teaching and sharing the word, and then they get the door slammed in their face. Meanwhile, their male friends, who may be as smart or maybe not, get doors opened all the time, and there's a tremendous amount of doubt, and you feel like you're an imposter. So I would say, first of all, to them, it does get better. Like, keep at it. Don't give up. You're going to need to persevere. Then I think I can say now, there's a lot of resources out there, including better translations, I think, that help capture what the Greek is really saying, that it's not trying to only talk to men or about men, but we can, in our English translation, be more general and include like brothers and sisters instead of just brothers, even though the Greek term is in the masculine. It's not trying to exclude women. So I think there are better translations out there. There are more resources out there that give alternative interpretations. When I was just starting out on this journey, my younger self, the Christians for Biblical Equality was just starting up, and other groups like that just starting. Now there's so many resources. So I would, that's, something I can say now that I couldn't say back then.
Yeah. And what surprised you as you dove into the Greek text and the New Testament? What surprised you theologically that you had always been told but wasn't true when you actually regarded the text more seriously?
I think I was surprised at how much women were doing.
Mm-hmm.
And how when we would talk about what they did, we would use language that was maybe belittling or so let me think of an example here. In the end of Romans 16, we have Phoebe, who was a benefactor of Paul, but early translations would say she was a helper. And so wow. That's not necessarily a completely illegitimate translation to say helper, but for us, it sounds like
inferior or subservient.
Yeah, inferior, exactly. And people why would someone choose that translation versus benefactor? Because there's sexism in some of the translations. I don't know how else to say it, sorry.
What?
So anyway, I think that those kind of things would surprise me. I think also what I grew up with were people starting with what they sort of propositional claims and finding what they might think of as propositional statements in the biblical text. And then from that, 1 Timothy 2, for example, see everything else. Let's say, all right, well, what if we started instead by looking at Priscilla and Aquila and their life? And what was it that Priscilla found lacking in Apollos and felt comfortable turning to him and saying, I got to teach you a little bit more about this gospel that we both preach. And Luke feeling comfortable describing that in the book of Acts. If I start there, and I know that there are women who were co-workers with Paul, Euodia and Syntyche in Philippians chapter 4, they're co-workers with Paul. They are active in the church and their opinions matter because they have influence. I start there and then I read 1 Timothy 2, think, that changes things. So I think what happened was people had these propositional truths. I mean, we kind of approach Christianity that way anyway, like evidence that demands a verdict, a kind of approach that way, an apologetics approach, and not so much a narrative approach. But I think when we look at the stories and we see the interaction and we create the communities that these churches were, we find women were just incredibly active in all different areas. And that's important to note.
Do you see, I don't remember which John it is, second John or third John, but written to the lady. Do you see that as written to a church leader who's female?
Yeah, I could totally see that. Absolutely. Yeah, I don't think the same with Nympha, the church that meets at her house.
Right.
These are, it doesn't seem to be a problem for the early church.
Right. And Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, Paul uses the same words to describe their ministry as he does their masculine counterparts in their ministry, right? Their co-laborers or their partners in the gospel or whatever it is. There's no difference in the wording, correct?
Right, yeah.
So if you start with the great and vast, it's seeming permissiveness of Paul in his practice, and at least Jesus in his practice, how do you then understand 1 Timothy 2 or 1 Corinthians 11 or 14, and pick either any of those if you'd like to talk about how do we approach those texts that seem so clear in English that we can just pull them out by themselves and say, yep, well, here it is, it's absolutely forbidden forever, and case closed. How do we approach those things differently?
I think biblical studies is becoming more comfortable with the idea of looking at the historical context, not to say that the historical context therefore limits the text to simply being only relevant to the first century, but especially in the form of letters, that genre really demands that we understand what's going on, because we're hearing one part of a conversation. It's different than writing a novel where the context and all of that is put together for you. In this case, a letter, there's a lot that's not said, but rather is assumed. So, for example, when Paul will say to Timothy, drink a little wine for your stomach.
What?
Most people, sorry, did you not know that? Was that not in your Bible?
No, that, it was never, I never heard that part though.
Well, yeah, of course. And we as teetotalers, my husband and I, in our early marriage, that was always kind of something you chuckled about,
Yeah.
But we all knew that back then they didn't have Pepto-Bismol. So of course, the prescription there is for Timothy to take care of himself. And so we understand, although the words literally are asking him to drink wine, that's not the thought that's being communicated. And so I think that's one piece that I think biblical scholars now are appreciating more and more. And I think also, let's just go 1 Timothy 2 for right now. If we start in verse 11, as though that's kind of the beginning of the letter, we end up missing what's really going on. What's really going on is at the very beginning of the letter, Paul is very clear that there are heretical teachers. And those heretical teachers are promoting falsehoods. These, I think they can include women, but it's a masculine plural. So we know there are also men who are they're teaching myths, endless genealogies. They provoke controversial speculations. They want to be teachers of the law, but they don't know what they're talking about. These are really strong claims, and that's in the first paragraph or so.
Totally. And he names two men, right?
Yes,
specifically.
At the end. Yep. So there's definitely an issue of bad theology that is bad enough to be dangerous. And so Paul is writing, and I do think it's really Paul writing really to Timothy, although there are some who will date this letter later than Paul, but I do think Paul wrote it. And so before I even get to chapter 2, I need to be alert to the fact that there's going to be heresy that happens. And so then when I finally get to chapter 2, we start getting instruction about how we should live holy lives. And that's such an important context for things. So when you think about these mainly Gentiles who are now coming into the church, what did they think holiness looked like? Well, we can be pretty sure what they thought it looked like. They're there in Ephesus. Ephesus had one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the Temple of Artemis, which I think I heard was estimated at 4 times the size of the Parthenon in Athens. For those of you who've ever been to the Parthenon, it's pretty big.
Yeah.
And to have something 4 times that size. And we know that festivals would go through the city on a very regular basis. So our brothers and sisters in the Lord who were raised in Ephesus 2,000 years ago, when they thought of holiness, they had a very different conception of what holiness looked like than what Paul is trying to promote. Right? They were used to the story of Artemis, and they were used to money and religion being tightly tied together, and people buying their influence. And
the Artemision was a bank, right? I mean, the Artemision was a huge bank.
Yep,
in that
absolutely.
region.
That's right. And people promoted themselves as devotees of Artemis and put up statues. And so paganism was just a very different way of being religious. And now you have these people coming out. I mean, there were obviously Jews as part of this community who did know the one true God, who did understand what holiness is, right? And Timothy was raised by his mom and grandma to also know that. But a lot of the people coming into the church wouldn't have known that. So one of the key issues, I think, is when we look at verses 8 and following from chapter 2, we start to get a sense of how there are problems with competition among the men in terms of who can be the most holy, and among women, how they dress. And we know there is what we would call provocative dress is how you might dress for some of these festivals. So Paul is saying, don't do that. And also don't flaunt your wealth. And then when we finally come to verse 11, a woman should learn in quietness and full submission, or you can say, let a woman learn. That is not in the command form, right? Or I'm sorry, it is. So my verse 11 is in the command form, even though my translation, a woman should learn, could say, let a woman learn. Paul is mandating that these women be taught. And, Jewish women who grew up in the synagogue, they were naturally taught. The word of God was spoken every week. It was read, and they did festival practices, and they had Shabbat meal. And so they were educated in a synagogue format, but there's no pagan analog to that. There's no education. Moreover, the education of women then and now can be a hotly contested cultural issue. When I lived in Kenya in the late 90s, and we lived in an area that was close to the Maasai, and we knew of stories where uncles would go to some of the schools and they would take their nieces when they turned about 13 or 14, and they would steal them from the schools and take them home and marry them because they had reached an age of being able to be married, and they felt that at that point they should not be in school, that corrupted them. And I knew stories of women who were protected by their fathers. Their fathers said, no, I'm not going to let my brother do that to you. And we know of the very famous story that happened a couple of years ago in Pakistan, right, where a girl was going to school, Malala, and was shot and almost killed by, again, this is another tradition altogether, who said, girls should not, once they become of childbearing age, they shouldn't get education. In the same way, in the ancient world, there was a lot of suspicion around women being educated. Women could be and were educated by their husbands and their fathers. It was happening at home. But there was a lot of suspicion around women knowing things. And Juvenal, who wrote satire and was a grumpy guy, I think just really a grumpy guy. And he has a lot of hyperbole around women knowing things, and he compares it to like pots banging together. And anyway, so he had opinions on just about everything. But
he was the first Twitter user, really.
Exactly. Yeah, thank goodness they didn't have it back then. So Paul is saying to Timothy, you have to make women's education a priority. There's nothing in the pagan culture that's going to encourage you to do that, but your church is now in the grips of a heresy. You've got to educate people. And we know how men can be educated. There's not the moral sexual morals concerns around that. So he can move forward with that, but he's going to need to push for coming up with structures that allow for women to be educated. And then in verse 12, I do not permit a woman to teach or have authority over a man. That actually is in the indicative. So you could translate it, I am not permitting a woman.
Yeah.
And I think what happens is we get these backwards. We think Paul is saying, when you have time, Timothy, it'd be great to put a Bible study together, like kind of one of those 8-week kind of things for the ladies in your church. And absolutely don't let them teach any man once he reaches an adult, whatever they would call adult age.
Yeah.
That's actually the opposite. Paul is demanding that women learn. Now, they learn in quietness and full submission, but that's how everybody learned then. There wasn't, very different educational expectations then. I am not permitting a woman to teach. And I do think that's what Paul is saying here. I don't permit a woman to teach, period. Because I think these women had, like the men, like the group that's mentioned at the beginning of the epistle, are teaching myths and endless genealogies and speculations, and they need to learn before they can teach. And then I'm not permitting a woman to have authority over a man. So that term, have authority over, is a verb we don't find elsewhere in the New Testament. It's not the typical term that we find for authority that's everywhere. So I don't really love the translation, have authority over, because
it's super negative, right?
It's such a negative term. In the very few times that we find it used outside of the Bible, it is. It's not the kind of authority that anyone should have over anybody else. It's not saying, here's your generic authority and men can use it, but women can't. It's like this type of authority nobody should use.
That's great. That's a really great point.
And then it says over men. The over men does go with this authority piece, not with teach.
Okay, so
in a grammatical sense.
Okay, so that's the big debate, right? Do the teach and have authority, is that expressing one idea or two?
Right.
And you're saying it's two ideas. I'm not currently permitting a woman to teach, and whether you put a comma or a semicolon or something there.
Yeah.
And then the have authority. What's that? How does that clause relate to the teaching bit? Is he expanding on it? Is he going to something else? Is he relating the two?
I think there's a content issue here, because obviously Paul's okay with Priscilla teaching, right? And he's okay with Phoebe reading the letter to the Romans. And most people, when they read the letter, the assumption is, if it's Tychicus, the assumption is Tychicus will tell you stuff. That's what Paul said. He'll fill you in on everything. So Paul believes women can speak authoritatively about the things of God to the people of God. I think that's the case. But in the problem situation that Timothy faces, there is a content issue where I think he's saying the women can't teach. I'm not permitting them to teach right now, and I'm not permitting them to assume authority over a man. And the reason, I think, is found in verses 13 and 14. For Adam was formed first, then Eve, and Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived and became a sinner. And when I look at those two verses, what I see is an aspect of the heresy that is circulating in Ephesus at the time. It's a heresy that will develop early in the 2nd century to become what we call Gnosticism.
Yeah, it's proto-Gnosticism, right?
Yep. And when you look at some of which I did just a few minutes ago before our call, just to refresh my mind, because I don't usually read Gnostic texts, just for our listeners realize that.
Sure.
But it is amazing. I'd forgotten just how weird, to our mind, these Gnostic texts are. The Gnostic texts, we've known about Gnostics from the church fathers. Irenaeus, church father that lived in the late 2nd century, talks about them, and we know them by name. We've got like Valentinus, one of the earlier ones who operated in Rome around the 130s, 140s. And earlier we have like the Gospel of Thomas, Gospel of Philip,
I
Apocalypse
remember when
of
the
Adam.
Jesus Seminar made huge news with the Gospel of Thomas.
Yes.
Way back in the 90s.
Yes.
It was a
And
big deal.
I think Gospel of Thomas is early 2nd century. I don't think it's 1st century, but nevertheless, some of the ideas that are in it, basically what they're saying is that Eve was not a sinner and she wasn't deceived. She brought real knowledge because she revealed to Adam the falseness of the creator demigod. They do a whole retelling of Genesis, and they turn it upside down. So they're very negative on created material, and that's why they would say like Jehovah God is not the one true God. But Eve, what she does as wisdom is enlighten Adam. Well, if there's any of the other thing that they have, let me just add, the other thing that the Gnostics do is they speculate a lot about the emanations from the pure light, what we would call one true God, the pure light. And so you have these various spiritual beings. Salvation is going through these levels as you get higher and higher, more spiritual, more spiritual. So it's all about knowledge. It's all about spirit and leaving the body, and that the body is bad. Well, if you have those ideas and then you turn to Genesis,
that's a
going to
problem.
reread it.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that Paul is trying to say here that Adam is formed first and therefore he's better. That's what Philo, a Jew who lived just before Paul, that's what he argues. The female is inferior. The female was taken from man, and so the female is inferior. The man was made from the earth directly by God, but the female is inferior. Well, I just don't see that in Genesis. I don't think that's what Paul thinks, that somehow the male is more perfect. Aristotle thought that.
Yeah.
Philo's drawing on Aristotle's thought, but I don't think that's what Paul is doing. So instead, what I think this heresy is related to Artemis. It's related to proto-Gnosticism. Artemis was seen as the goddess who protects through childbearing.
Yeah.
There is some myths about the Artemis beginning that she's born first from instead of her brother Apollos. And so, I feel like they're just pulling together some of these myths. They're speculating about the heavenlies. And later it gets codified and produced into texts and taught, and it becomes a really bad heresy. You don't have that yet, but you've got some of it. And that's why the women must learn. And that's why they have to understand Genesis. Adam was formed first. Adam wasn't deceived, right? Eve was deceived. She's not the heroine in the story the way the Gnostics present it.
No, that's huge. That is massive. And is the educational system, is that the reason why Paul in Corinthians will say, ask your questions to your husbands at home, instead of disrupting the church service? Was because it was just assumed that that's where women were educated?
Yes, that would be the expectation. Yes, if that's what he is asking there. I mean, there is no law. It kind of goes on to say this is what the law says, and there isn't actually any Old Testament law that supports that. So I also could imagine the Corinthians themselves trying to impose things that are extra biblical. Mandate. And I say that in part because there were a lot of widows and slaves. We think there were maybe 20% of the Christian population were slaves in any given community.
Wow.
They're not going to be able to ask their husband at home. They have no husband. And then I don't know what percentage would be of widows, but the people... they died at young ages. And so I don't know if it's 20% of women had been married once and are no longer married. I mean, that's I just can't imagine Paul saying, to 40% of the women who are not yet married, have been married and are now widows, or who are slaves, I'm sorry, you'll just have to continue to wonder in silence because there's nobody you can ask.
Yeah.
It just, I don't think, by the way, that women were gossipy or yelling across the room at their husbands and disrupting things that way.
Yeah.
In as much as I think Paul at least was very familiar with synagogue worship. And at this time in the first century, the synagogues were not separated by gender. That wasn't like how the Orthodox Jews today separate men on one side, women on the other. That wasn't the case in the first century. And so you were just sitting next to your husband or whoever you happened to be with. I also think there was if there was a sense of disorder, which clearly there was in chapter 14, the people are speaking up. They're speaking in tongues and they're not waiting for it to be interpreted. And Paul says that God is a God of order, not of disorder, and the spirit of the prophet is under the authority of the prophet. So you can wait your turn. You don't have to speak over each other. That there's that's the disorder that's happening. It's not generated because women haven't learned to sit quietly in a public setting.
Isn't the instruction to women for women to be quiet? That's the third be quiet command, isn't it? In that chapter, I thought.
In 14.
14, yeah.
It very well could be.
Tongue speakers were to be quiet unless there was an interpretation, and I think there was one more maybe about prophecy. But that same verb or command was used not just of the women, but of other groups as well, which was a surprising thing I realized. And like, oh, okay, got it. This is total Bible geek question, but do you think those verses are authentic there? Are you like a la Gordon Fee? In terms of, he argues they either don't belong or, I'm telling you things you already are an expert in. So what do you think about that one?
Well, I did follow Fee in that they were an interpolation, a later interpolation. But I'm more convinced now with the argument put forward by Lucy Pepiot in some of her work, where she talks about how she thinks that Paul is arguing against the Corinthian and a group within the Corinthian community that is trying to assert a male priority where Paul doesn't see that with the gospel. And the thing that really actually changed my mind on that was in chapter 14, Paul cites their quotation of it's a collection of Isaiah. I think that's where it is. Isaiah 28, 11 and 12. With other tongues and through the lips of foreigners, I will speak to this people, and even then they won't listen to me. But actually, when you look at both the Hebrew and the Greek, and there's a few variants between those two. Nevertheless, what is quoted here in 1 Corinthians fits neither of those. It really actually changes the meaning of the words of Isaiah. And I just don't see Paul ever doing that. Paul, to me, even if there might be a variant or so in his quotation, nevertheless, it follows the meaning of the prophet or the text in the ancient, in the Old Testament. And so here, I thought, that's right. This looks kind of wrong. And so if you read that section, though, as Paul citing the Corinthians, and then after that's correcting them, I think it makes a lot more sense. Therefore, I could also see him then saying, women should remain silent in the churches. They're not allowed to speak, but must be in submission, as the law says, which the law never says anywhere. If they want to inquire about something, they should ask their own husbands at home, for it's disgraceful for a woman to speak in the church. And then, or did the word of God originate with you? I think Paul is citing their argument and then saying, wait a minute, did the word of God originate with you? Because after all, it's disgraceful for a woman to speak in church, except that they are praying and prophesying in chapter 11.
Yeah, exactly.
And Junia is with her husband or brother Andronicus in jail at times because she's speaking the gospel. And Phoebe is reading the very word of God, Romans, to the Romans. And Euodia and Syntyche are doing something and in their churches. And Nympha is leading the church, or the church that is meeting in her home. And I could just go on and on with women who are actively speaking.
Yeah.
And that, whereas in the broader Greco-Roman world, the woman's voice in public is problematic. And so, if I thinking of this women's voice being problematic, one of the more, I don't know how to say it, but
use cuss words if you need to.
What's that?
Use cuss words if you need to. It's okay. Tim's heard them all. No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I actually wasn't thinking that, Mike, at all. But
okay, I couldn't tell. I thought maybe there was something coming there.
Yeah, Plutarch writes.
There it is.
Advice to the bride and groom, and I was trying to think of he's kind of sounding sort of modern, sort of pro-woman.
Got it.
But even in that, which is, it's not horribly misogynistic like so much in the first century. Nevertheless, even he will use images that it's just clear that the woman doesn't have a public opinion. She doesn't even really have a private opinion, but she certainly wouldn't give a public opinion. And she follows her husband's lead. I don't want to necessarily say desire, because for us that often only means sexual desire. I mean, whatever he imagines as good, a good wife says, yes, that's good, and enters into that. And his friends are her friends, and his ideas are her ideas. And she becomes a good wife by being what he imagines a good wife to be. And Plutarch, of course, wants this man to be a good Stoic who's rational. So, I mean, it's not like he would allow for awful behavior that then the woman has to. But I that vision that Plutarch has of what the fulfillment of a woman is one where she doesn't say much, and so if at all. So I could imagine in Corinth some of the men in the congregation who are still very tied to their worldly views, or the views of the wider culture, saying it's disgraceful for a woman to speak in church. But that's just not true, because these women are speaking, and Paul encourages them, praying and prophesying, right? Prophesying. So I think that's how I would, in kind of a long answer.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
Tim, I think you had a question.
I do. I didn't want to interrupt you guys because this is all fascinating. I want to zoom out a little bit. And I think the thing that always bothers me the most when I think about this topic is how much work goes into, whether it's gender, sexuality, or race, how much work goes into trying to keep hierarchical structures. And people it's just this constant kind of tumble dry of people trying to enforce these ideas over and over and over again, and how much work goes in for a faith that's based in, inclusion and love, and kind of Paul breaking down a lot of those binaries. And so I think about that. And then, you mentioned being in your 20s and kind of that being the time and place where you start to generate you start to build foundational beliefs kind of that you'll grow into adulthood with. And so I teach English, but it's at a Christian college. And so my age group is that demographic. And, the reason we started this little series and conversation on biblical masculinity and femininity and whatnot is because of so many mostly white men coming out and just, chastising everybody and talking about the lack of manhood and advocating for all these kind of like getting back into these manly ideas and what a man is. And so, and that's all fine with, we can push back on that stuff on an academic level with these guys that are in their 50s and 60s and 70s. But for my students that are like in their 20s, I'll have them, I can think of 2 or 3 students right now that just wrote papers this semester advocating for an ideal of manhood and kind of lamenting on a really, freshman non-English writing level of trying to advocate that they feel like this is something that's being taken away from them. And it's like, that's kind of our posture especially again, as white men, we are always combating the fear of people taking away from us. And so whether it's saying, hey, women have an equal stage here, it's like, well, no, a woman needs to know her place beneath us, or if it's race or if it's sexuality. So I think my question is very, as I said, pulled back and looking at that generation that they don't have their toes in the academia of all of it yet, but they are entering into a world of trying to negotiate these binaries that have been handed to them and have been told them, especially in the last 6 years or so, that there is a threat that's out to take away from them. How you like begin that conversation of saying, hey, it's not that, it's this. Does that make sense? Like, how would you speak to the people in their 20s that are the ones that are going to inherit the church and are going to inherit family structures and all this kind of stuff that we have handed down that still pushes for these binaries and still pushes for these hierarchical structures that are trying to keep people in places?
Yeah, now that's a couple of things occur to me. One is, I think, just the way that you're phrasing it of male and female, that has to be binarily opposite, right? The first story in Genesis of creation tells it as male and female, he created them. And then they're to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and rule over it. And you get this sense of real teamwork. In other words, the emphasis is not on how is a man different than a woman. In fact, even in the second account, or the more detailed account in chapter 2 of creation, when Adam sees Eve, it is, finally, this is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. We're together now. I've named all the animals, and none of them, even the dogs, which surprised me, even the dogs, he's not going to take as companions. But it's now, finally, I have her. In other words, the biblical text does not encourage this opposite view, like somehow man is opposite of woman. That's from Aristotle, right? And I'm not saying there's no difference between male and female, not at all. But what I'm saying is that what Aristotle did was describe male as perfect, and then female as opposite of that and inferior. And so I feel like when we do binaries, almost by definition, if the one is described as hot, then the other has to be cold. Or if the one is described as up, the other one has to be down. There's no way to think about difference that's not opposite. Yep. Yeah. So that would be one thing. Secondly, I would really encourage them to read the Gospels, like read them slowly. Think about how Jesus is described. Because he is fully human, so he's my model as much as he is your model. But as a man, he seemed to resist the Roman masculinity push that is actually very similar to American masculinity, and he doesn't pull into that. There is a vulnerability with Jesus that as our Savior, we can model, and we should. So that would be something else I think that I would go to. And then third, I would say, think a little bit more deeply about this notion that you feel something's been taken away, this kind of zero-sum game, and sit with that for a little bit. What does it mean that you feel somebody else took your toy? Is that because they didn't have a toy to play with and now they do? Does that mean that you kept all for yourself something that maybe is a good that you don't want to share with others? What is it that I almost feel like at times when young men say that, they are not reflecting enough on what that means for their sisters in the faith who have maybe similar desires. There is a great little book, you probably know about it, Dorothy Sayers' Are Women Human?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And
that's got some doozy quotes in that one.
It is so good. It is so good. And she wrote it, 1938.
Yeah.
So it has enough cultural, unfamiliarity, and it's not really super threatening that way. And it's written at a time, women for a long time couldn't vote. For a long time, they couldn't vote. I think women were finally admitted into St. John's College in Cambridge in 1980. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
I had no idea it was that recent.
Oh, it's incredibly recent. Yes. And I hope, one of your listeners will be able to tell us if I misspoke on that. But one of the colleges was that late. And people were really mad at that. So I think, the fellas in your class, I don't think they would want to take the vote away from women. But if they ever read the arguments for why women shouldn't vote, it's because they'll cancel out their husband's vote. It's because they're irrational. They can't understand the things of the state. All stuff that we know is just not true, or not true only for women.
And it sounds like the arguments that are very similarly employed against women in church leadership.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Well, what was the thing last week or 2 weeks ago that we saw tweeted was someone was advocating why women shouldn't be in leadership is because they're too empathetic and too inclusive.
Yeah.
Or like, wow, those were the checks against were empathy and inclusion.
So usually you don't start with women, you start with something else, right? Like, what is good leadership? Authoritarianism. Right. Okay, well, you're right. We don't tend to raise women to be authoritarian, so they might not fit that. Okay, but there's usually something else going on, and that I think is the case with some of your male students. There's something else kind of going on, and I never went to seminary, in part because, well, I know, crazy. Well, I assumed I would. I finished with a religious studies degree, and I thought I'd, go on to get my MDiv and then go on for my PhD. But the church would not sign a letter of recommendation for me. Yeah, they didn't.
Come on.
Yep, I know.
Jeez.
So anyway, they would allow me to go if I studied church history or Christian education. And as you know, I already tried the education route, and that wasn't going to happen.
Right.
And I just think God has such a sense of humor, because now here I am, provost of a seminary.
Totally.
Anyway,
Totally.
It's just awesome. But when I was teaching at Wheaton in our senior seminar class, there were always about 25% of our majors were women. So that was the makeup of this class. Let's say we had maybe 20, 25 students. And as part of the class, everyone talked about what would be next steps after they graduated. And there was a woman who was the smartest person in the class. Like, everybody knew that. But she was also the most gracious. Just
that's a rare combo.
Yeah, just really so self-effacing and unassuming and just off the charts brilliant. And so anyway, when she said, what am I going to do? She's answering that question to everyone. She said, well, I did want to go on to Princeton, and I think she had a really good scholarship there. But my church will not sign a recommendation for me because they don't think women should go to seminary to study Bible. Well, my heart broke because I thought, you're kidding me. Like, this is the next generation and we're still in that spot. But I also watched, especially the men around the room, many of whom were in a denomination similar to hers, which they also knew, my denomination will not send any woman. So any of my classmates here, including the smartest and most humble Christian in the group, I don't have to compete with her once I get to seminary, or not even if I think compete, like we're not competing for a seat in that classroom because I've put my thumb on the scale. My church has put its thumb on the scale.
Yeah.
Those women aren't going to go. Now, her story ends well because she was actually able to get a letter, not from her church, but from someone else who could vouch for her. And so she went on. But just watching the young men kind of process through, I was raised that women shouldn't go to seminary, but it was an abstraction to me. And I didn't really think about it. But now it has a face. And it has a face of my friend who I know would excel. And I know is not out for power or greedy or any of those stereotypes that are often stated, about women who are reaching above themselves.
Right. Oh, well, Lynn, man, this is so good, so helpful. Thank you for your work in all of this. Thank you for persevering through all of those obstacles to become, a really preeminent New Testament scholar and provost. We need a better, it's a cool title, but we can do better. I'm thinking like Emperor of Student Affairs.
That's
Czar.
Good. That's good. That's
any
right.
Any of those? Provost just sounds okay. Is that a farm thing?
It actually was I think it goes back to being a jailer.
Yeah. Interesting.
I know, something like that. Yeah, it's definitely
perfect.
It fits sometimes. The herder of cats is what it should be, because that's really as provosts deal with faculty. But anyway.
Where can people find more about you? Do you want us to direct them to your website?
Well, yeah, although I'm so technically challenged and all that stuff that I don't really have. Yes, they can go to my website. At Northern Seminary, we have the Center for Women in Leadership. And that would be a good place for them to go and get resources. And
that.
So, but I joined Facebook years and years ago when our kids went off to college, and I said, that will be my way to stalk you. See your pictures and get to meet your friends that way. And, now they graduated, so there's no, anyway.
I know.
I'm really bad. I'm really bad on that stuff.
No, that's all right. That's all right. I just didn't know if there was some super secret, organization that you were featured in, that, the National Provost Association, some sort of website. I don't know. Just checking. I just had to.
No, but, I would encourage women, if they're interested, and men, all of your listeners, to check out my podcast, The Alabaster Jar.
I didn't know you had a podcast.
Yeah. The Alabaster Jar. Mm-hmm.
Let me just
not
throw
as
in
good
one
as
last
this one, of course, but, maybe eventually.
Hey, how fun is that? Well, if you ever need white middle-aged men, because the world needs more of those, we're available. And
awesome.
you know what you're getting. You're getting one face and a heavyweight in the more literal sense. But thank you.
And that's a nice tie-in, Mike, by the way. Kind of bookends things. You're a pro. You're a pro.
What can we say?
That's it.
What can we say? This is what we do. Lynn, thanks. Seriously, it's great to meet you finally, and just appreciate your generosity with your time and expertise.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for inviting me on the podcast.
Thank you for listening to this conversation. Voxology is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that is supported by listeners just like yourself. If you'd like to partner with us, you can do so at patreon.com/Voxology. You can also join the community and hang out and chat with us on the socials. Facebook.com/Voxology Podcast and on Instagram @Voxology. Thank you for walking the long road with us.